Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining in. Today, we're going to talk about marriage.
Yeah, we're really excited about this. This is the first episode that is dedicated to marriage, and we have not done that yet, but we hope that this will not be the only time we chat about marriage. We have some other things in store for future episodes as well.
Yeah, and today's theme is choose love, and we'll get into that in just a second. But the entire point of our podcast is on this topic of being spontaneously obedient, which is to help us get, I would say just to help us live a more intentional life. And for those of us that are married, it's kind of an important piece is our marriage, I would say, because we've chosen to be with this person and spend a lot of time with this person. So if we're going to spend a lot of time with this other person, it seems like an important relationship for us to be intentional about our lives in general. So I think marriage is an important topic, so we will visit it, I think, several times throughout.
Today's topic, though, is relevant for relationships other than just marriage as well. So maybe friendships or sibling relationships or relationships with your parents or in-laws or coworkers. This can be applied to all of those relationships.
Yeah, which is, I think, well, we'll talk about this a little bit, so I'll hold it for now. I won't say more about that.
All right.
But I do want to talk about one other thing, which is we said that, hey, we're going to be spending a lot of time with this person that we chose to be with. But actually for us as Christians, it goes deeper than that. So I want to read a scripture for us to start out. And here's what it says. For husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her. As the scriptures say, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. This is a great mystery, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. Ephesians 5:25 and then 31 and 32. So the deeper part here for us as Christians is it's also an example for others. So not only do we want this relationship to be good because, hey, I have to live with you, but also because it's an example of how Christ loved the church. So we are actually setting an example for others as Christians, so it goes even deeper. Right.
I like it.
But one other quote here that I think is important too, that talks, I think, about what we're going to talk about in our content, which is it's a quote from Francis Chan in a book called You and Me Forever, Marriage in Light of Eternity. And he says, many people will tell you to focus on your marriage, to focus on each other, but we discovered that focusing on God's mission made our marriage amazing. So how might this picture of how Christ loved the church in our marriage actually be all about Christ?
Right. And we actually, you can just read the book or you can do it as a Bible study. And we did that, a few years ago, and it was very good. So if you're looking for something to study specifically about marriage, that's a good one.
Yeah, so definitely links in the description. Check it out.
Yeah, we'll link there.
So choose love. Will you start us off with the scripture there?
Okay, sure. I think I'm going to do 2. Is that okay?
Let's do it. Yep.
All right. Most important of all, continue to show deep love for each other, for love covers a multitude of sins. That's 1 Peter 4:8. And then we also have the famous love chapter that you've probably heard at almost every wedding. And it's 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7. It says, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance.
So now tying back to what you said earlier about how this session in particular is applicable to really any relationship, the first scripture obviously in Peter was, hey, love everyone. So that wasn't a marriage thing specifically. Now you said that the Corinthians one is associated with weddings, right? Well, that's where we hear it a lot.
Yes.
But that wasn't where it actually was about. Did you want to say more about that?
Well, yeah, it was actually, okay, I hope I get this right. It was actually Paul writing to the church in Corinth, and they were experiencing conflict among themselves. And so he was writing with this information saying, hey, this is how you should be behaving, during all of this conflict, or maybe even to help with the conflict. So I liked that. It's not even, and the original purpose wasn't even for a spouse, a marriage relationship. It was just for conflict in general.
Yeah, exactly. And
I hope I'm right on that. I'm pretty sure.
We'll get fact checked, I think. We'll see. So, and although it was for how we should love one another, so anyone, it certainly is very applicable to marriage as indicated by you when you said it's very associated with weddings, obviously.
Right.
One thing I would like to call out here too is that love doesn't. The New Testament was written in Greek, basically, fundamentally, and love doesn't actually translate well into English. It's maybe not the exact right way to say it, but in Greek there were multiple ways to say love, and they all had different meanings. Mm-hmm. And so I'll just call it a couple of them. So basically there's a friendship type of love there was a specific word in the Greek for friendship type of love. There was a specific type of love in there that meant intimacy. And there was also a specific type of love, a word that meant unconditional love. And most of the time when you see love in the New Testament, it's actually talking about the unconditional type of love, agape love. You probably maybe heard that before. Mm-hmm. And you found some content about what agape love means. I mean, we hear unconditional, but I think you found a few more descriptors that I liked. I know you liked as well.
Yeah, this was just from the Got Questions website, which we really like. It was just saying how agape love is always shown by what it does. So it's an act of the will, and it involves faithfulness and commitment. And, so it's action, right? It's choice. It's not just a feeling or an emotion. It's more than that. And it's more intentional than that.
Which is why now back to that 1 Corinthians 13, we call it the love chapter. One of the things you really notice if you go back and actually listen and read the words carefully, you see they're all about action.
Right.
About intentionality, behaviors, not about feelings. So we also did a study recently called Mingling of Souls by Matt Chandler, and there was a important point in there about this intentional love as well.
Yeah, he was talking about how we're called to do this whether or not it's reciprocated. And I thought that was just so key because it's easy to love someone when they're also loving to us, right? When they're kind, when they're not rude, when they're not keeping record of wrong. But let's say they are not kind, they are rude, they are keeping record of wrong. Well, there's no caveats in that scripture. We still are called to be kind and not rude and all of those things. So, of course, when that love is reciprocated, it's much easier to give it. But when it's not reciprocated, that does not give us an excuse to not give it, if that makes sense. And man, that's hard. It's just, it's that dying to self, right? Which we're called to do in the scripture. And yeah.
Yeah. In fact, this is a little bit of just me talking here, but I think I would even almost take it a step further and say, especially when it's not reciprocated.
Yeah.
If you are still showing love as outlined here by the scripture, so, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, no record of wrong, then you're really doing it sort of because you're being obedient. Because that's if you're loving someone when you don't like them, you're kind of being obedient to Scripture. And so, especially when you said earlier from the Got Questions study that it was an act of the will, or for the Got Questions website that was talking about this Scripture, how it was an act of the will required, basically active and choice. You had to choose it. It reminded me whenever you and I think we're in college and apart from one another most nights, and so we'd be on the phone. Well, I don't like being on the phone. That wasn't my style. I don't want to be on the phone. I'm fine if we're together and hanging out, but didn't want to be on the phone.
Yeah.
But for you, those phone calls at night were super important.
Yeah, I loved it.
And, you were happy to be on the phone a long time at night, going through our days, etc. And that was hard for me. I have to admit, it was hard for me to do that, but I did it because I knew it was important for you. So it was one of those times I reflect. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing back then, but I reflect back on it now and I'm like, okay, I was actually showing, I was being intentional about how I loved. And
right.
So I just thought I would call that out
good example.
From our story.
I kind of want to read through, and maybe we can do this at the end, but I kind of want to read through that chapter again in 1 Corinthians, or those verses again, just a little bit more slowly, so we can actually think about, if we replace love and it with our own name, how are we measuring up?
Yeah. I think that's a good thing. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to do that at the end?
We can do that at the
we'll
end.
Do that as sort of a summary at the end. Okay. So how about a couple of applications otherwise, how to do this just in our daily lives? So we talked about maybe a story I had whenever I was younger, but what about a couple of other applications here?
Yeah, I even think just date nights. That might sound a little cliche. I don't know. You always hear, make sure you keep having date nights. But I do think that's important. And I think it's important to, think about what you guys enjoy together. Also think about what your spouse enjoys doing and maybe set something up that might be more geared toward that person. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about date nights that are important is the intentionality. I mean, back to your point.
Right.
And it's not because, you should just, well, yeah, it's fun to go on a date night. It's more about being intentional about spending time and find ways also when you're spending that time to get to know each other, to serve one another. So make it an intentional date night, not just sort of mind-numbing fun, let's say. Although partly that's, I think, good if you can do some of that. So, I think date night's a great one. We also did this book a long while back. It was pretty revealing to me, I know specifically, which was The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. Do you remember that book?
I do. I liked it.
Yeah. So real quick summary of that book is, let's say fundamentally there's 5. So Gary Chapman's take was there's 5 love languages. These are different ways that we each experience love, and we might actually experience love in a different way than other people. Meaning that if we experience a certain type of love language, then it actually fills our love tank, so to speak, more than other types. And one of the punchlines that's really important is you and your spouse might have different love languages. And if you do, you got to watch out for that, because those different love languages mean that you might actually be using your own love language with your spouse, expecting that it has the same effect that it does on you. And for us in particular, ours were completely different.
Yeah,
so
we had none overlapping.
Yeah.
So I'm not very good at it still, but we have to be very intentional about speaking each other's love languages, because that's not how we receive love the most. How do I say that? That's not how we feel loved the most.
You're right.
I would like to share the 5 love languages that Gary Chapman gives. 1 is quality time, then acts of service, words of affirmation, physical touch, and gifts, or receiving gifts. And again, none of ours overlapped, which was interesting. But his point is, you will feel loved most in one, when you receive love in one of those areas, maybe a couple of those areas. And so it's important to know those things as the spouse. Yeah.
And one of the things that happens too is, keep me honest, I'm not sure. My recollection here is that, so just call it mine. Mine is words of affirmation and physical touch. Those are my top 2. And so typically what that means is those are the 2 I will give as well, or I'm prone to give. Is that from? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm prone to give words of affirmation and physical touch as the way I give love, even though your 2 love languages were not those.
Right.
So yours were quality time and acts of service.
Right.
and those were lower for me. So quality time and acts of service do not fill my love tank, so to speak, as much as the other ones. So if I'm giving the ones that I like to receive, we may be completely missing each other, in our love languages. So very compelling for me to go through that and see those differences. I will say one thing I like about ours not overlapping is we kind of don't get to be lazy about those ways we love, right? We can't just use what we like or becomes natural.
Right.
We have to think about doing the other thing for the other person.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually written in my calendar before, like, touch Mark today, like tickle his, like when I walk by him, rub his back or something like that. Hold his hand or whatever the case may be, because it's not on my radar. Yeah. Which you would think after however many years we've been married, over a decade, that it would be on my radar.
It's that discipline. It's that being intentional,
Yeah.
So there's part that I do like about that. And I can remember you saying to me sometimes, did you notice that thing was laying on the floor for like 2 days? And I'm like, no. And I know that's not like cleaning is not a love language, but for you, like service.
Acts of service, yeah.
And for me, like, even though, you're serving me by cleaning, but I don't receive you cleaning as like, oh, that was an act of service. Or even if it was an act of service, it just doesn't hit me like it would hit you. And so when I'm like, I should probably do some dishes tonight, even though I didn't even really notice there were dishes in the sink, but they were sitting there for a long time.
Yeah.
But out of being intentional toward you. So, I recommend highly that Love Languages book. There's like a quiz that you can find your love languages.
Yeah.
Very enlightening for us.
Yeah, it was good. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to end with a quote, again, from Francis Chan in the book You and Me Forever, Marriage in Light of Eternity. And then I like your summary. I like your ending that you proposed as well about the going a little slower in the love chapter.
Sounds good.
But so here's the Francis Chan summary, and here's what he says. Here's a blueprint for marriage. 1, we become overwhelmed by Christ's care for us. 2, so we shower our wives with the same love we receive from God. 3, then people are shocked by our extravagant love toward our wives. 4, as a result, we are given an opportunity to tell them about the love of Christ that compels us. And I really like that. It's like, wow.
I like that too.
And you were saying that you think it applies in reverse, I think, as well.
Yeah, he says, so we shower our wives with the same love. And I think it would apply, for wives. So we shower our husbands with the same love we receive from God. And then,
get that opportunity later.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
that's good.
Any last thoughts before maybe we go through that a little, like, one more time with some, intention behind the words?
I don't think so. Not from me.
Okay, great. Let's finish with that.
Okay. What I would like us to do here as I'm reading this is to replace love, the word love, and the word it with your own name. Okay? And so as I read through this, I just want us to see, how are we measuring up? Would this be true? Would this statement, this verse be true if we read it with our name in there? Or what are the areas, and if not, what are the areas that we could work on?
And I'm going to add one other thing in while you do this. And I think this is something that we did in church recently. But as we're going through these, and Fallon will go slowly, but feel free to get a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And when she says, for example, love is patient and kind, like make a little tick mark. Are you patient? Are you kind? Mm-hmm. And then when she goes through, see how many of those that you are doing, are acting, are being intentional about in your life.
Yeah.
And of course, we change, right? This isn't binary all the time, right? But I think it's a good exercise just right now. Like, how are you feeling on these?
Yeah, and if you have no tick marks, that's okay. You can start with any of them, right? Yep. And just start with one and work on that. Be intentional about that and move from there is what I would say.
Yeah, good.
Okay, here we go. Again, this is 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I'm going to read verses 4 through 7. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance.
Awesome.
That's it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining.
Yeah, don't forget, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, if you're finding it helpful, please let us know. Share it with your friends and family. That's the best way for this to get heard by others and hopefully be helpful to them as well.
Yep. And thanks for joining in, and we will see you next time.
Bye.